Hello everyone, I am Priya Prithviraj and I'm a doctoral researcher at the English and Foreign Languages University in India. Today I'm here to talk about narrative co-construction and how we can use it in the language classroom. Before we begin the presentation, let me give you a quick overview. Firstly, I'd like us to understand the terms narrative and narrative co-construction. I'd like us to understand the role of parental interaction in narrative co-construction, and then we'll discuss the features of maternal speech, the styles of parental interaction, and the types of parental questions. We'll also take a look at some sample activities, and we'll summarize the key takeaways. So let's get started. Firstly, let us try to understand what a narrative is. According to Labor, it is at least two sequential independent clauses describing a single past event. In other words, it is an account of events in a coherent sequence. So when a child is narrating what happened at school, it is a narrative. Shared storytelling or shared book reading are all events of narrative co-construction, where the interlocutors are actively participating in eliciting and assembling individual events to construct a coherent narrative. It serves as a structured opportunity for the child to practice narrative skills. Research shows that parent-child interactions during such narrative conversations shape their narrative development. Moving on, let us try to understand the role of parental interaction in it. Parental interaction provides modified input, interaction, feedback, scaffolding, and noticing, all of which facilitate language acquisition. Narrative co-construction involves an operationalization of the Vygotskian concept of scaffolding, whereby knowledge or meaning is co-constructed through socially mediated interaction with a more knowledgeable other. In our case, it can be a teacher or a parent, a co-narrator that is, and this has to happen in the zone of proximal development. Now, the zone of proximal development is the space between what a learner can achieve independently and what a learner can achieve with scaffolding. This space is exactly where we should give scaffolding. Nothing more, nothing less. And this, by making new demands, push the learners to reach their highest stages, leading to internalization of narrative skills. Now let us look at the features of maternal speech that facilitate language learning or acquisition. While talking to children, mothers often make interactional modifications or adaptations such as using a slower pace, high animated pitch, varied intonation, or shorter and simpler sentence structures. You must have noticed it. They also employ techniques such as repetition and paraphrasing to make the input comprehensible and recast the child's output into a grammatically correct version. This is an example of implicit feedback. Now, what is the takeaway for teachers from here? During narrative co-construction, teachers can adapt their speech in response to the learner's conversation, whether they comprehend it or not, and focus on engaging them. Like how mothers make use of the child's utterances, teachers can make use of the learner's contributions. Whatever limited amount it might be, they can still use it. Use the techniques like repetition, paraphrasing to teach, model, and reinforce implicitly. Let us take a look at the styles of parental interaction, documented by McCabe and Peterson. One style, high elaborative or topic extending style, describes parents who construct richly elaborate descriptions, provide a lot of information, and tend to ask many questions. The other style, low elaborative or topic switching style, describe parents who have short conversations, provide little descriptive information, and tend to ask the same questions over and over. That must be boring. Now, in this longitudinal study, one mother who included a lot of orienting information had her child also include a lot of orienting information in their unscaffolded narrative elicited by an examiner. The other mother, who elicited more temporally ordered descriptions of actions and events, had her child include more temporal information compared to orienting information. Moving on, let us look at the types of parental questions documented by Peterson and McCabe. One type is WH questions. The second type is yes or no questions. All of these pertain to the context. Parents who provided many WH context and yes or no context questions had children who included much orientation through when and where information in their unscaffolded narratives elicited by an examiner. And the takeaway for teachers would be to use high elaborative topic extending style and ask a lot of context orienting questions. Also to draw the attention of learners towards the structure of the narrative. Now, Let us take a look at these sample activities. Over here, you can see some questions which can be used as a pre-storytelling activity or as a warm-up activity. What do you think the story will be about? What characters do you think will appear in the story? As you can see, these are open-ended questions and can start a conversation even before the story has begun. If you are reading from a storybook, you can even ask questions about the book cover, the title, or the illustrations in the book. Next, we have some questions that can be used as a while storytelling or even as a post-storytelling task. Where and when is the story set? Who is the main character? What do they want? Why can't they get what they want? How is the problem solved? As you can see, these questions correspond to the structural elements of a narrative: setting, character, goal or motivation, problem or conflict, resolution or ending. Based on the level of your learners, you can switch up the complexity of the structure. You can use even a detailed narrative structure, such as attempt, outcome, a second conflict, which doesn't get resolved. These are some activities which can be used as graphic organizers or with just hands. On the left, you can see an image which is of a filled-in graphic organizer where a child has used this framework called Somebody Wanted But So Then, SWBST, to summarize a story. Incidentally, this happens to be an episode of Miffy and Friends, the British cartoon. As you can see, the terms correspond to the structural elements of a narrative. Somebody, wanted, but, so, then. Character, motivation, conflict, attempt, outcome. And on the left, you can see an illustration of the 5-finger retell activity: character, setting, beginning, middle, end. You can switch up the complexity of the narrative framework based on the level of your learners and also based on the learning teaching objectives. Now, let us summarize all the takeaways. Firstly, teachers can adapt the narration in response to learner comprehension. Don't just adapt the story for once, also adapt it based on your learners' response to the story. Make sure they participate. And when they do, make use of their contributions, however limited it might be, by means of repetitions, paraphrasing, and recast to reinforce narrative structure and to correct errors implicitly. Use high elaborative or topic extending style and ask a lot of context orienting questions to elicit and model narratives. Draw learners' attention towards the structure, and you can use these activities we discussed. I'm sure you can come up with more. These were just some sample activities. Finally, I'd like to conclude by focusing on the aspect of interaction. I cannot emphasize enough on how important elaboration, elicitation, and participation is during these narrative conversations. Ask learners open-ended questions. Make them talk about the story. Don't just tell a story, tell it together. Retell it, ask questions, have a conversation around it. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful.